So, how in the world did the Soviet Union, a nation that was on the absolute brink of total collapse in 1941, manage to turn around, push back, and ultimately crush the Nazi war machine? It's one of the most incredible turnarounds in all of World War II, and today we're going to break down exactly how they pulled it off. Let's just start with this pretty shocking admission from a top German general way back in 1941. This quote, it just perfectly captures the huge miscalculation that really doomed the German invasion from the start. They thought it would be a quick, easy win, but instead they walked right into this brutal, grinding war of attrition that they were just not ready for. But before we get to the victory, you have to understand there was near total annihilation. In the summer of 1941, the Soviet Union was pushed to the absolute edge, facing a threat unlike anything in its entire history. Right, so on June 22nd, 1941, Hitler unleashes Operation Barbarossa. He famously believed the USSR was basically a rotten structure that would just fall apart with one swift kick. And at first, the unbelievable speed and ferocity of the invasion, well, it seemed to prove him right. It is really hard to overstate the scale of this disaster. The territories that the Wehrmacht just rolled over, they held the very heart of Soviet industry. We're talking a staggering 85% of their entire aircraft production capacity. Gone. The situation looked absolutely, completely hopeless. And yet, somehow, in the face of this catastrophe, the tide started to turn. Now, this wasn't some elegant or easy victory. Oh, no. This was a victory forged in sheer, brutal, desperate resilience, right there on the battlefield. 3 absolutely colossal battles really defined this turnaround. First, you have the defense of Moscow, which finally stopped the Blitzkrieg in its tracks. Then came Stalingrad, which was the huge psychological turning point. And finally, the Battle of Kursk, which just shattered Germany's ability to launch major attacks in the east for good. Wow. This quote from a German officer, it just paints this terrifying picture, doesn't it? Stalingrad wasn't a normal battle. It was like a descent into hell. The city was bombed into a field of rubble, creating this nightmarish landscape that the Germans grimly called Rattenkrieg, which means rat war. And this is where Soviet tactics completely flipped the script. They turned those ruins into a fortress. You had snipers everywhere, desperate hand-to-hand combat in basements and sewers, and they kept the front lines so close together that German planes couldn't bomb them without hitting their own troops. It was the total opposite of the open-field tank warfare the Wehrmacht had perfected. Leadership, of course, also played a massive role here. While Hitler was becoming more and more irrational, forbidding any retreat and basically dooming his entire Sixth Army at Stalingrad, Stalin, for all his paranoia, eventually learned a really crucial lesson: to listen to his generals, like Zhukov, and allow for some strategic flexibility. So, to put it simply, Moscow stopped the bleeding, Stalingrad was the great reversal, and Kursk? Kursk was the final blow. From that point on, the strategic initiative, the momentum, belonged entirely to the Soviets. Okay, so this battlefield victory raises a huge logistical question. How on earth did the Soviet Union arm and supply its massive armies after losing the very core of its industry? Well, the answer lies in one of the most astonishing logistical operations in all of history. A true industrial exodus that literally saved the Soviet war effort. In this desperate race against the advancing German army, the Soviet Union managed to completely dismantle and relocate over 1,500 of its most vital factories, moving them thousands of kilometers to the east. Just try to imagine the sheer scale of this. Entire factories, all the machinery, the workers, everything, packed onto trains and shipped thousands of kilometers away to the Urals and Siberia. And there, they were rebuilt from scratch, often in the brutal, freezing cold. The urgency was just incredible. Workers would start reassembling machinery under the open sky, sometimes in the snow, before the factory walls were even finished. And the result of all this? Within just 1 year, this relocated industry was already outproducing all of Nazi Germany. Unbelievable. But this absolutely monumental domestic effort, it wasn't the whole story. The Soviet war machine was also being powered by a critical lifeline of foreign aid from its Western allies. This lifeline was called the Lend-Lease program. Essentially, America became the arsenal of democracy, shipping enormous quantities of vital supplies to the Soviet Union and filling critical gaps right when they were at their most desperate. The impact here was enormous. We're talking over 400,000 trucks and jeeps, millions of tons of food, essential raw materials like aluminum for building aircraft. And those American trucks in particular were a total game changer. They gave the Red Army a kind of mobility that it just couldn't have produced itself. Think about it like this. By the end of the war, a full 1/3 of the Red Army's entire vehicle fleet was American-made. That kind of mobility was absolutely crucial for the huge offensives that eventually pushed the Germans all the way back to Berlin. Maybe the most powerful testament to its importance came from Stalin himself. At the Tehran Conference in 1943, he privately admitted to Roosevelt and Churchill just how indispensable all that Allied support had truly been. So, this immense sacrifice and this incredibly hard-won victory on the Eastern Front gave the Soviet Union a very powerful seat at the table as the Allies began to plan for the world that would come after the war. As victories started to look more and more certain, the leaders of the Big Three, that's Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, they met at a series of high-stakes conferences to basically decide the fate of Europe and the world. Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam. These were the meetings that would redraw the map. At Yalta, in February 1945, the major frameworks for the post-war world were hammered out. Germany would be divided up. The United Nations would be formed. But recognizing the reality of where the Red Army was, all across Eastern Europe, some very controversial compromises were made that effectively handed the region over to Soviet influence. And this really brings us to a crucial, lingering question. The alliance that defeated Nazism, it was one of necessity, not really one of friendship. So, in redrawing the map of Europe, did the wartime leaders accidentally sow the seeds of the very next global conflict? The Cold War?